Hello, today we are going to talk about creativity, what creativity is, and who has it. So, today's session will focus on all the dimensions of what it means to be a creative person or to create a creative product, or what are the processes that are involved in creativity, or what environment makes it conducive. So, let's take a deeper look. So the first question that arises is that where does creativity reside? Does it reside in the product, or does it reside in the person? Does it reside in the process, or does it reside in the press or the environment? So we'll first look at the product. So when can we say that a product or an outcome is creative? For example, if your son has produced a new contraption, is it creative? Or is something else involved in calling something a creative achievement or contribution? So, the first thing to note is that the thing has to be new and useful. Whatever you have produced should be new, it should be novel, and it should be useful. And we'll break this down further as we go along. As far as a person is considered, you look at what are the traits that the person has. Some traits will make someone more creative than another person. For example, we know that people who take more risks, people who for example are more rebellious, they are creative persons. Similarly, we can look at what process underlies the creative outcome or achievement. So creativity is a process, not the outcome. So some researchers believe that the process of divergent thinking leads to generation of many ideas, and then many novel and original ideas, and then the process of convergent or critical thinking leads down to evaluating which of these are useful and selecting it. And then there are different stages involved, some of which involve divergent thinking, some of them involve critical or convergent thinking, and that leads to creativity. Finally, we come to the press or environment, that whether there are some conducive environments, like for example, if in Renaissance happened, then was it due to the patronizing that the poets, sculptors, and the other artisans received from the kings and other influential people out there? So you have to create an environment which leads to people indulging in creative activities, whether they be artistic or scientific. And again, we'll not restrict ourselves to creativity in the artistic domain or scientific domain. We would say that creative you can be in any domain, entrepreneurship or politics, leadership, anywhere where you do something which is different, something which is original, and which takes the domain or furthers the domain. So that is which leads us to the next topic, that when is something creative? I mean, is there an objective definition of a creative product or creative achievement, or is it all subjective? So here there are two aspects that we need to look at. First is that whether the thing or outcome, whether the song that someone has produced, the scientific discovery that someone has made, an invention that someone has created, whether they are new and original. And this original contribution has to be related to a domain. So this cannot happen in vacuum. For example, if you say that this poetical form has been a novel form, then someone must have mastered that poetry domain. It has to be a contribution within the poetical domain, that this is a new art form. Let's say Saiku, as I've contributed recently, which is a combination of a psychological haiku, a haiku but more uh, psychological in content. So that could be considered a novel contribution in a poetical domain, just to give an example. And here comes the matter of whether the creativity that we are judging is a little c creativity or a big C creativity. So, what we mean by that, little c creativity is everyday creativity. Like, for example, my psycho or might be original for me, but the domain might reject it as anything useful or novel. There might be some other person who has come with a similar concept earlier. So that might be a unique or original contribution as far as I am concerned, but as far as the domain is concerned, the contribution may not be novel. A similar example could be that your child has come up with a Pythagoras theorem solution or conjecture, and that is novel to him because he never heard of Pythagoras theorem. But that is not big C creativity, because in the domain of mathematics, that theorem is very well known and proved. So big C creativity happens when you actually contribute some original stuff to the domain, and you either transform the domain or you lead to a new domain creation itself. So for that you have to master the domain first. So this myth that you can just be very talented and thereby be very creative is a myth, a genius myth. You have to spend many hours mastering a domain, maybe 10,000 hours, as Anders Ericsson and his colleagues say, before you can actually make any creative contribution by transforming or creating a new domain. Then, whatever you have done, it has to be valuable. Valuable to something or someone, it should solve a problem. It should basically also be valuable in terms of it should be judged valuable by others in the domain. This is called as the field. The prominent people in your domain should actually have a consensual view that this is a good contribution, that this is solving a good problem or leading to a transformation of this domain in the right direction. So you can remember the field as the Fields Medal in mathematics, which is equivalent to the Nobel Prize. So that is based on the field name of someone or surname of someone. But you can consider that the field medal would be given only when the field accepts, or the people, prominent people in your domain, accept you as a uh, contributor who has contributed in a new and original way and a valuable way. And this evaluation may change with time and context. For example, what may be considered as very creative right now by people, and this is especially true in arts domain, that a art form is considered very novel and valuable by the people of one particular context or historical time frame, but in another time frame they may see it as a mere craftsmanship and not really anything valuable. So and it happens with science also. For example, Mendel's discoveries, they were creative in and of themselves, but unless they were evaluated by and rediscovered later, one would say that they were not really valued by the domain, by the field, and as such they were not really a creative contribution, or Mendel was not creative until and unless he was rediscovered. Now this is a very controversial take, but this makes us understand that if you want to really focus on the creative aspects, you have to look at not just an individual, you have to look at the whole system, which involves the domain, how open the domain is to creative contributions, to the field or the people making the domain, how open they are to accepting the creative individual as someone who has contributed for the benefit of the domain. So it's a social process also, as far as it's more than what one would say that it's a individual process. Now, let us see what are the traits of a creative individual. Given the fact that it's a social process, still, and you always stand on the shoulders of giants before you make any contribution, still, there would be some traits associated with the creative personality. And we'll take a brief look at those traits right now. This traits I've picked up from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's work on creativity as outlined in his book Creativity. And the one thing he says is that the creative people are complex. Now, some brief outline on how he came to these conclusions. He interviewed close to 100 people who were prominent people, creative people, some of them Nobel Prize winning people, but otherwise also had achieved or great eminence in their respective fields. And he found that they all had a high level of complexity, which is they display flexibility moving between very extreme ends of a trait, or which could be called paradoxical in a sense, because they would be uh, competitive also and cooperative also. They would, depending on the situation, move between these traits, display high competitiveness or high cooperativeness. So they were a sort of multitude in themselves, not a single person. With that out of our way, Let's look at some of these contradictory or paradoxical traits of the creative persons. So these were 10 traits that Mihalai had identified, and I'll just go quickly over them. First is they are energetic. They bring huge energy to whatever they are passionate about, and they are passionate about the domain. That's why they are able to master the domain and make creative contributions. Yet they prefer solitude, they prefer quietness, they prefer me time, sleep time, and all that. So just remember that when you are really passionate about something, you also need to schedule in downtime so that you are able to achieve the right amount of creativity in that pursuit. Second is they are smart in terms of they have above average IQ, and they would be street smart also to an extent. And there is some controversy here, like a high IQ is not a very stringent requirement. IQ greater than 120 is good enough. And here also there are many different perspectives. But definitely, just like the research that higher money doesn't always lead to happiness, higher IQ doesn't always lead to creativity. There may be a threshold of IQ below which you will not be creative, but above that threshold, it depends on you only whether you are actually to able to turn that into creativity. And yet they are naive. They have a wonder or a take on the world which is not bound by the knowledge that they have accumulated. So they would look at world with fresh eyes. They would display some innocence. They are playful. They have a attitude where they are not too doggedly determined or attached to the outcome, and yet they are persistent. They are very much determined to achieve whatever they have set their mind to achieve. They are imaginative. They have their default mode network very active, so they would be able to conjure stuff. They would be able to imagine stuff that has not yet happened, and yet they are grounded in reality. They do not lose their realistic touch with what is actually pragmatic or what is actually useful. So this trait again shows you that to imagine something which has not yet come, you need to be imaginative, but then you need a grasp on reality to also understand whether that original stuff that you have thought of will be valuable. So there, this contradiction or paradoxical trait again helps being able to make you create something original due to your imagination, and also something which is practical because of your grounding in reality. Looking further, they are extroverted as well as introverted depending on the situation. So they like to have again those quiet times and quiet moments, but they are more able to mingle, network, and reach out to other people who are on a similar pursuit and passion. They're humble in terms of they would be very modest, they would be very cooperative, and yet they are proud and they have a competitive streak also within them. They are proud of their achievements and they want to have a drive. They have a drive to achieve more and more. They have the right sort of masculinity or femininity. I mean, some of the men would have much more sensitivity like a female has, while some of the females would have much more drive and ambition like the males have. So that sort of a balanced portfolio they have of this masculinity and femininity trait. They're rebellious and yet they are conservative. They would be original, iconoclastic, and yet they would learn the tradition, they would learn the rules to know how to break them. They would be passionate about whatever they are doing, their domain, and yet they will be objective about whether that whatever they are doing is of value, whether that actually is good or useful. So again, they see things both from a passionate angle as well as an objective angle. So detached as well as attached. And lastly, they would be fitting the prototype of the anguished genius, someone who is very sensitive, someone who feels deeply, who is affected deeply by the questions that life throws their way. And yet, they will also go about doing all this joyfully. They have a happiness in their life, a spark in their foot and their life, which makes them do all the hard stuff that is needed to get the work done. So now we have taken a look at what makes a product creative and what sort of a personality is creative. So let us also look at what sort of a process is creative. So if we look at what makes a process creative, then the creative someone come up with a good idea. Then there have been some process theories or stage theories where people have postulated that there are 4 or 5 stages through which a person goes while he or she is working on an idea. So these stages are, first and foremost, the preparation stage, where you actually wonder about the right questions. You do some background study, you are very curious about the whole topic, and you prepare yourself so that the luck or chance can favor the prepared mind. Then you actually, when you're in the preparation phase, you are very keenly focused on a question, and that sometimes narrows your options. So what you do is you let go of the obsession with that question on which you are working, and you let it incubate, you let it unconsciously work on that by maybe doing some fun activities, by sleeping over it, going on a vacation. And at that time, your brain, the unconscious brain, makes disparate combinations, connections between disparate ideas, and something clicks. So it is a period which is not really known to your conscious self as to what is happening, but ideas are combining and recombining in the background. And that leads to insight. When suddenly these ideas, disparate ideas, combine, then something novel appears, some new solution happens, and then you are able to see the solution to the problem. Now, some people think that that is the end of the creative process, but it's not. You have come to an idea, you know that this idea is there, but you do not know whether this is the right idea, this actually solves a good problem. So, next stage is evaluation, where you use your convergent and critical thinking abilities to decide whether what you have come up with will actually work out, is actually useful. And then finally, once you have decided based on your own internal evaluation, so this is not valuation by the field or the prominent person in your domain, but by yourself, you next go to elaboration. You put in the hard work to make a prototype, to demonstrate to the world that what you have actually thought up makes sense. So you actually work out your theoretical proof if you are in maths, or you actually compose the symphony if you had an epiphany that this tune is good. So all that goes in the elaboration phase, where you put in the 99% of the hard work. So I think that is all for today. In the next video, we'll look more into what makes for a creative environment and how you can increase creativity. So I thank you for listening, and do send me across questions if you would like them to be covered later into the next video or the other videos. Thank you.